Hello and welcome to the Midnight Choir, the Rovers weekly podcast and sometimes bi-weekly podcast. We are fully reader supported and we want to say thank you right now for all of the time that you put into just watching these videos. We thank you for the fact that you are currently subscribing to our YouTube channel, the fact that you are literally moving your mouse down and clicking that subscriber button right now. I am so amazed by the fact that you are doing that. And also, we are so thankful for the fact that you are currently...
one moment in your day, but it's a lifetime of
It's a lifetime of difference. We are thanking you for... We know for a fact that you're typing into your search bar right now, therover.ca/support-us, and you're signing up for the free newsletter, which Chris himself is the writer of.
I craft it with my bare hands.
So please, we are fully reader supported. Go check out therover.ca/support-us, or just check out therover.ca. All the articles are there. You can find everything on that website. It's a really good website, recently just remodeled from the ground up, and it's looking really good.
Yeah, we just released something on Montreal's new nightlife policy, or the recommendations that will hopefully save some of Montreal's dying clubs and venues. That's by Amelia Fournier, one of our reporters. You and I were at the encampment last week at McGill. We did a video there.
The video is doing really well. We encourage you to check it out. Like, we tried being
We're just trying to be out there.
Balanced.
We're like among the people, Los Pueblos.
We're gonna try and get out there more, I think. Because
it's fun, and I
want to talk to humans. I like doing the video stuff personally. I really enjoyed actually. Like, surprise, the media guy likes doing videos.
Why not? Why not? Fucking A.
But yeah, thank you so much for supporting us, guys. Fully reader supported. Chris pays for his child to continue surviving through your support. So please, please support Chris supporting his child. What are we talking about today? Can you tell them about the new segment that we're going to do in Monday?
Yeah, so we wanted to break down a couple of big news stories from this week. There are two that I think address a lot of the issues that come up a lot in our podcast. One of them has to do with transit, and the other has to do with... a legal challenge to Bill 21, Quebec's secularism ban.
They're just huge stories in Quebec.
Look, there's a lot of... The thing is that in the transport one, there's a lot of ins and outs. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to refer to my notes here. War on cars. We just welcomed our newest foot soldier, the mayor of Quebec City, Bruno Marchand. So after a terse meeting with the transport minister, Geneviève Guilbeault, the mayor accused Guilbeault of having no vision on public transit and being stuck in the 1960s. Bear in mind, this is the mayor of Quebec City. Everybody drives in Quebec City, and many would argue Quebec has been stuck in the 1960s for a while.
When you go to
he's
Quebec,
the cool mayor. Bruno Marchand is the cool mayor. He wears skate shoes. He bikes to work.
Well, Quebec is... I went there recently. It's definitely going through a modernization. Like, as a general whole, you can see it modernizing as a city. Things like breweries popping up all over the place. It's a place that
Quebec City's dope. People like to
dunk on it.
They love to dunk on it, you know, and it doesn't make us any taller, and it just makes us jerks. So no dunking on Quebec City, but they had a bit of a confrontation, the mayor of Quebec City and the transport minister, because in part the transport minister said that. Actually, let me just... Guilbeault recently changed the title of transport minister to Minister of Transportation and Sustainable Mobility. So we learned recently that the Minister of Transportation and Sustainable Mobility refuses to invest in sustainable mobility. She said her ministry's job is to, quote, gérer les routes, which means oversee the roads. This comes at a time when Guilbeault is meeting with the province's mayors to discuss a crisis in the funding of public transit in our cities. If you look at Montreal and the STM, our transit authority, for example, revenues from transit fare have dropped dramatically throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And now that the pandemic is ish done, a lot of people are still working from home. There's been a significant drop in revenue for the STM, which creates a sort of death spiral, right? So less revenue leads to a reduction of service, which leads to fewer users, which leads to less revenue, which leads to a reduction of services, and so on and so forth. In Montreal, our transit agency says it needs $420 million to cover the deficit or services will be cut. Geneviève Guilbeault offered, the transport minister offered us less than half that. An amount she said will help cover the costs of lost revenue since the pandemic, but not our much larger structural deficit. Another problem with this is that we have the recent construction of the REM in Quebec, the REM, our light transit rail, and rather than add more people to the to the system of public transit users, it's actually sort of cannibalizing our existing transit system. So bus lines that would ordinarily take you from the suburbs to the city within maybe 20 minutes, they're now just redirecting you to a train station, and in some cases, it actually makes the trip longer. And since the transit agency in Montreal, it doesn't own the REM. The REM is the REM is a band. The REM was funded by our Caisse de dépôt, Quebec's investment arm. They're not owned by the same thing, so technically they're competitors, and that brings up a lot of problem. Anyways, let's move over to Quebec City. In Quebec City, there's a growing traffic problem because something like 90% of people in the capital don't use public transit. Of the 8 largest metropolitan areas in Canada, Quebec has the highest share of people who drive to work. It's basically the polar opposite of Montreal. But Mayor Marchand is trying to change that. He recently did away with a super outdated policy that requires developers to include parking spaces for each residential unit they build. That just creates more sprawl, right? Each building has to come with a parking lot. It takes away, it de-densifies the middle of the city, and it pushes more people into the suburbs, and that just contributes to traffic. So he did away with that. He wants to work with the federal government on a $2 billion. Well, the federal government would invest $2 billion in light rail for a tramway in Quebec.
Oh, that would be so good.
But the thing is, like, every city in Quebec, they need to get their transport budget mostly comes from the province, right? So and because we can't borrow money and it's illegal for cities in Montreal in Quebec to run a deficit. We depend heavily on provincial subsidies for our public transit to work. So of course, Premier Legault weighed into this debate and said, quote, "I've been in politics long enough to know that for mayors, it's easier to beg for money than it is to clean up their finances." Yes. That's rough, eh? This is fucking mean. In case you're curious, the last time Legault managed to balance a budget in Quebec was never. Last month, Quebec announced it would run. It's Legault as the CAC minister. I'm not sure what his performance was like as PQ minister. Maybe they balanced it once when he was in government. I don't think they did.
Quebec's Canadian governments rarely balance budgets.
Yeah. It's. I mean,
most budgets in the world are rarely balanced.
But I mean, I would not go after someone's financial management if I just posted an $11 billion deficit, yeah. Right? I'm not saying we're wrong to run deficits. That's just how modern economies work. But it's weird that the premier would call it begging when a city does it, but the premier turns around and goes to Daddy Justin all the time and asks Daddy Justin for some daddy warbucks. And like, what? That's just, it's diplomacy when you do it, but when the mayors do it, it's begging. They use the word quêter in French, which is like, it's kind of like, it's like panhandling, like you're panhandling. It's a kind of a degrading word. Anyways, to me, that's one of those, it's like a Russian nesting doll of issues that I think, define the CAC really well. I'm curious what some of your thoughts on it are.
It's a very classic Legault type of thing to do, and it's funny too because he was quoted as saying, I think it was last year, he said, "I would like Quebec City to be the next major metropolitan city in the country." And he truly believes it will be. And like that's probably true because cost of living is much lower up there. And it's a city with a lot of potential and room to grow.
Yeah, I mean it's Quebec City is the last deep sea port before you reach the Great Lakes.
That's right. And so it could be like it is a prime spot for a metropolitan place to grow, you know?
Yeah, you have a bunch of universities. Like it's of course. There's an educated population. You have a lot of government workers. It's a lot like Ottawa, you know, almost everybody.
It's very similar to Ottawa. And so I think it's kind of weird that he would just say both, I want this to be the next great metropolitan, and then wouldn't invest in major public transport overhauls because public transport overhauls are necessary in major metropolitan areas. For example, Ottawa is building their light rail constantly now.
Wasn't that a disaster?
I mean, the launch was supposedly a disaster, but like we're also talking about a country that hasn't launched a line essentially since the 70s.
Yeah.
And so like we're talking about I think, in my opinion, a lot of short-term memory right now, where
Yeah.
people are like, I'm guessing there was a bunch of glitches in the system for other
No,
places.
I think it was like the mayor probably stepped down over. It was like the rollout was terrible, and this shit
That's
happens.
right, and
it
this
happens
shit does
with big
happen.
projects.
But you also, Ottawa is growing so fast that they realized we need a proper metro system.
Yeah.
And if you want to modernize a place and have like a truly great metropolitan area, you have to, bar none, invest in proper train systems because cars just don't work. Have you seen LA?
Yeah.
LA is a nightmare. It's a metropolitan nightmare. And
Well,
unless you want to create more LAs, which we don't, we need to build light rails. If we're looking to make sustainable choices globally and lower our ecological footprint, we have to invest in light rail and metro systems that are powered exclusively by electricity.
Well, I mean, the crazy thing about all this is that like it plays into this classic cities versus suburbs debate.
Right.
And the mayor saying, well, I only care about roads. I'm only focused on roads. They don't have first of all, there's no real vision for like, well, what do you want your society to look like? Do you just want more of the same? Do you just want more roads? The only real project that Guilbeault has presented to sort of define her mandate as transport minister has been to create like a sort of like Santé Québec, a separate agency that oversees all of the public transit and transportation network, and they would hire someone really cool. They call they have this expression in Quebec French, the Top Gun. They would go get a Top Gun kind of administrator to oversee this, and that would fix all of the problems. But I just think fundamentally they don't really understand the functioning of government here and what the transport minister's job is. But I also think there's a misunderstanding of public transit being seen as some city slicker thing, when in fact, it's factory workers who use it, it's nurses who use it, it's
everyday people who normal labor jobs.
And if you're in the CAC heartland and you need some kind of surgery, or you need to go to a hospital, or you're going to be glad that there's a public transit system that feeds employees into this big giant machine, right? You want to get the best care you can, and that's going to affect that, and that's going to affect your traffic, that's going to affect your commute.
It'll also, for those who use cars, it significantly makes their lives better as well, because like, let's talk about like how bad Montreal traffic is famously, and that's with a pretty good transport system.
Yeah.
So like the moment you add in transport, because like there are millions of people using the Montreal transit system per year, and it saves a lot of time for people who are driving, even though it's still so bad. And it has been proven.
And the cost per user, right? Like when you're building, like, we act as though, again, this is this illusion that the city is leeching off of everyone for our metros and whatever, but we subsidize, like, when you take your car alone to work and you drive on a road that was built by the province, et cetera, it's a lot more expensive per person than when you invest in a bus lane or the creation of a light rail. So it's just a classic example of a government that seems to only see one financial quarter at a time, right? And
there's no long-term thought. If you're not investing in light rail and like public access like that, you are missing the forest for the trees. You're thinking only of an immediate budget thing that makes you look good. It's cynical to not consider the long-term consequences of actions, and a lot of governments are cynical in that way because they're politicking, right? They're just playing this game. And Legault is a game player.
Yeah. Well, what I on the political side of it, what I find interesting is, not long ago, Geneviève Guilbeault was seen as the successor to François Legault. She's the deputy premier. She's young. She's new to politics. She hasn't been tainted by all these scandals of the past. She has a sort of rough charisma where, she seems like a leader, a decision maker, someone who is not easily offended and charges forward. But her career stalled hard when she was appointed to transport minister 2 years ago. I'm going to read you a list of transport ministers, and you tell me what they all have in common. All right. François Bonnardel, André Fortin, Laurent Lessard, Jacques Daou, Robert Poetti, Sylvain Gaudreau, Pierre Moreau, Sam Ahmad, Julie Boulet, Michel Després, Yvon Marcoux. Do you know any of these people?
Not a single one.
So none of them became premier. You don't go from transport minister to premier. It is, aside from health, probably the most thankless job in Quebec. Our roads are garbage. Our transit system is in constant crisis. We're constantly having to go make up the money somewhere. So, I mean, I feel for Guilbeault politically because this is kind of a death sentence. But at the same time, no, I don't at all. I mean, you're an adult, you make your decisions, right. and this is, again, a government that is just so confident right now, but they're clearly, it's undeserved. And
but aren't they tanking in the polls?
They are tanking in the polls.
So why are they so confident?
Well,
and I mean, polls don't mean much. Like, let's be
no,
honest.
no, but
polls
it's,
don't mean much. But
when you take polling over a 6-month average or longer that they have been tanking, it's reflective of a real distaste for this government. I'm not saying they're going to lose. They're very good at like the election's in 2 years, so it doesn't really matter what the polls say today. We'll see.
Year and a half. It's a year and a half away.
Yeah, you're right. It's a year and a half away, but that's might as well be in 10 years. Like, that's in today's politics where everything changes so quickly. They have plenty of time.
Yeah.
And like what the opposition, the party polling ahead of them has 3 seats in the National Assembly.
Yep.
And
yeah,
I don't know if you're aware, but that's a huge disadvantage in how you organize and how you raise money, in the resources you have access to. Even though the Parti Québécois has more members than all of the other parties combined, and they have a better fundraising apparatus, they're still, to make the jump from 3 seats to forming a government, the only comparable is the PQ in the 60s or the PQ in the 70s. So
Liberals in the federal election in 2015.
True, but they had more than 3 seats, right? Like they had like 20 some odd seats.
I don't think they did. I thought it was less than.
They had dozens.
They
of
were
seats,
dead in the water.
They were dead in the water.
As far as
they were
everyone
the
was
third.
concerned.
They were the third party. I think they were the first in federal politics to jump from second opposition party to government.
That's right.
Majority government.
Yeah. So that is a reasonable comparison. It's not quite 3, but also there's way more seats in the federal government than there are in the National Assembly.
There's a lot of seats. There's 125 seats in the National Assembly.
How many are there in the federal?
338.
Yeah, that's so 20 versus 3 is actually a comparable.
Okay. All right. Split the difference.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We just shook hands.
I just think that like it's crazy to me that a party who's trying to talk about a national identity is not actually creating a national identity, because our national identity has traditionally been, Quebec has been more progressive and more environmentally friendly and more all these things. Yeah. But this group is exclusively focusing on the French, but an identity is vastly more than a language. Okay?
Yeah. Language can be the basis for your identity, but I mean, you wouldn't say that, like, English and Americans speak the same language, but culturally
totally different.
Apart,
yeah, that's it, man. Or Germans and Swiss Germans, like they speak the same language technically.
Yeah, they speak the same language. One of them has much more liberal banking
We
laws.
speak the same language as France.
Yeah,
we are not like France, although we seem to be trying.
We want to inch towards that. Yeah,
we're trying to, and I don't know if that's a good thing, because a national identity and becoming like Quebec has the potential to be this example for Canada, and traditionally has been. On
childcare we are, and on a lot of issues we have been, but
we were on healthcare, we were on pharmacare, and we shouldn't want to fall behind on abortion, on public transport. We were an example,
and as Amira El-Gawabi said last week, the first legislature in Canada, even before Canada, to adopt
Charter of
Rights, right? Which kind of segues into our next segment pretty well. Last thing I'll say about the politics of it is that, like, it is a time where people are starting to jump ship from the CAQ. That's never a good sign when people say they're not going to run in the next election, and when staffers leave.
Yeah.
So Vincent Desmarais, who is is on staff for the premier, he's leaving. Or no, he was with Simon Jolin. Anyways, they've lost something like 2 or 4 staffers. They've lost one of their is it Lefebvre who's going to be running for the Conservatives. Let me fact check this real quick. You can edit around this, right?
Yep.
So just as a sign of how the government's or what the mood is inside the party, Manuel Dion, who was the head of media relations,
related to Celine Dion.
No. Last week, the principal advisor and sort of ideas guy for strategy, Vincent Desmarais, left to join the Federal Conservative Party. Wow, and Éric Lefebvre, who is an MNA for the CAQ, has also left the caucus, and he will be running for the Conservatives in the next election. And Vincent Desmarais, who joined the premier's office in 2022, is also leaving. So when these kind of high profile, well-paid people start to leave, it's a sign of a larger kind of. I mean, they're not dumb. They're all. This is the party of careerists, right? People have their political convictions change on a dime, so that they can keep advancing, and all of a sudden, people are going to this conservative party that is extremely unpopular in Quebec, but they see an opportunity and they see more of a future for themselves there than they do with the CAQ, which is another kind of harbinger of trouble for them down the road, I think.
I think so too, especially if you're going to the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows, right? Who knows how the next federal election is going to shake out, but if you're basing it on current polling, the Conservatives will not do well in Quebec.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's straight up. It's almost like a traitor to Quebec. You know, you're going to the Conservatives. That's crazy. You won't win anything in Quebec with the Conservatives.
No, the last big movement of conservatism in Quebec was when Brian Mulroney was leader, and they were called the Progressive Conservatives. And this must feel like generations ago, because it was.
I mean,
Brian Mulroney famously just died, right? So yeah, it's
more than 25 years ago.
It's not. I don't know that it's a winning recipe, but it's a change of scenery. And when people are looking for a change of scenery, you might be in trouble. All right. So also in the news, the FAE, which is the largest teachers union in Quebec, certainly one of the most combative ones, has joined the English Montreal School Board.
They are the French school board?
They are a French school board, or no, sorry, not a school board. They're a French teachers union.
Okay.
That has about 60,000 members. They have joined the fight against Bill 21 in the Supreme Court. Okay. This is a very big deal.
It's a huge deal.
The until recently, opposition to Bill 21 could be kind of, you could say that it was the Anglos and it was immigrants or sort of, as Jacques Parizeau would say, the money in the ethnic vote. But now, you have this huge Francophone union. Many of their members probably support the CAQ and support this, but the leadership in the union is saying, look, we don't want our members to face discrimination on the job. We don't want a government that kind of, and for those of you who don't know, Bill 21 is Quebec's secularism bill, that does prevent teachers, prison guards, police officers, crown prosecutors, and people in a position of authority from wearing the hijab on the job or wearing other religious symbols, but it really does seem to almost only exclude people who wear hijabs and Sikhs.
Just because it's so obvious.
Yes, yeah, they've done a very bad job at hiding it. So a friend of ours,
I actually just meant because it's more visible to wear a hijab.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Because whereas like
you can put a cross under your shirt.
No big deal.
Yeah, no one knows. We practice the religion differently, right?
Yeah.
Our friend Fred Birard, who was on the podcast a couple weeks back, he's helping them out. And his argument here is that the FAE, they're not. So the English Montreal School Board, the way that they're arguing against Bill 21 is they're saying, okay, you've used the notwithstanding clause, which is this clause that allows you to circumvent the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You're using the notwithstanding clause to pass Bill 21. We believe that one of the few places in the Canadian Constitution that isn't affected by the notwithstanding clause is the separation of powers, or at least in this case, it's Anglophones in Quebec have a right to control their own education, the same way that Francophones in the rest of Canada have a right to control their own education. The original appeal against Bill 21 was rejected on those grounds by the Superior Court. And so it didn't apply in EMSB, in English Montreal School Board schools. But then the Court of Appeals struck that down, and it has now been determined that, yes, Bill 21 does also apply in EMSB school boards. So they've taken it to the highest court, right, the Supreme Court, and they're continuing to make the same argument. But what the FAE is arguing is that they want the Supreme Court to give us some guidelines about when you can use the notwithstanding clause. And in this case, I had to write it down because it is a bit of a complicated issue. So they want to distinguish. So they see the notwithstanding clause was used by this government also to pass Bill 96, which is a measure to protect the French language. So this group says, that's fine for Bill 96 because it's to protect a right. But with Bill 21, you're taking away rights, and you're not demonstrating that there is an urgency that would require you to use the nuclear option, which is the notwithstanding clause, to circumvent all of these human rights. They haven't demonstrated that there's some crisis that necessitates this. And what the FAE wants is the government to actually have to demonstrate why it's using the notwithstanding clause, because they've never been in a position where they've made that argument cogently. And I'd be excited to hear whatever it is they have to say on the issue, because it's the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. You shouldn't be allowed to just roll over it. Anyways, that's my sort of narrow interpretation of things. Also noteworthy, between 1975 and 2018, Quebec used the notwithstanding clause once for 5 years under the Bourassa government over an issue regarding signage. Under the CAC, it's been used 3 times in 5 years. Twice for Bill 21, because you have to renew it every 5 years, and once for Bill 96. So it is a huge step. A line has been crossed. You're seeing it being used across Canada. Saskatchewan used it in their hateful anti-trans law.
It was super inspired by Quebec, though. Quebec.
I mean,
and then everyone else was like, "Oh, we can just ignore the Charter of Rights and Freedoms if we use this."
Well, the creation of the notwithstanding clause is mostly inspired by the prairies. They would not sign the Constitution without it. They didn't want to have our Eastern values imposed on them. But now that it exists, Legault has used it a bunch, and it breaks the taboo, right? It pushes the Overton window. So. Rob. My God,
Doug.
Is it Doug or Rob? Doug's, wow.
Rob's dead.
Rob is dead. Doug Ford used it against striking workers in Ontario. It's been used in Saskatchewan. Alberta says they'll use it to pass their anti-trans bill. So we're crossing into this really dangerous place, and I think Richard Martineau, who's a columnist at Journal de Montréal, recently said, he made a big joke you're saying that they're going to come for all these different rights, but you're not proving it. This is such bullshit. The point is not, let me restart that. I'm sorry. People can come for your rights. Once you've established that this is a new political norm, that you can just, when it's convenient for you or when it's politically expedient for you, that you can use this constitutional jujitsu to ignore people's basic human rights. Once you start going down that path, then you've pushed the Overton window, and you can start using it in all kinds of different ways, as we're seeing it's being used across Canada. So we're not being alarmist. We're actually seeing a trend of, these governments that care less and less what the courts say. And, they say, well, look, you're circumventing the will of the people, of democracy, but democracy is a lot more than the will of the majority, right? If 50% plus 1 can determine the fate of the other 49%, then that's tyranny of the majority. And in our case, even though the bill is very popular in Quebec, the CAC was elected by 40% of electors, and they get to decide how all of our rights work. I don't like that. I mean, I sound like a fucking broken record, but you can never overdo it arguing in favor of human rights.
I feel that in regards to human rights and democracy, democracy is founded on the idea of progressing towards greater human rights. And when we ignore that when people use things like the notwithstanding clause to kind of bypass that, it's calling into question what is the point of the Charter of Human Rights. It's undermining the very foundation of democracy.
Yeah,
which is the problem here. Like we're not talking about just the CAC was voted in legally and properly, right?
Yeah,
and that's important. We know that it's a fact, and therefore they have the ruling power. But then the question is, when you can bypass significant amounts of rules that were supposed to protect people, well, at what point is it no longer the vote that's giving them power and like actually them just grasping power that they want to do something? That's often I love minority governments in Canada. It's minority governments in Canada force governments to compromise and listen, and usually the bills that come out are a lot more thoughtful.
Yeah.
And when we have a majority government, things get passed, and you're like, well, that's not great,
Oh God, Stephen Harper's majority was they ran roughshod over.
Yeah.
It was like they were so aggrieved, and they were acting like they were still in the minority and they were under threat, and it was like their majority was them taking revenge on all these on all these people they thought had wronged them. And
like, think of how much more good the Liberal government has done this past term because they've had to work with the NDP. They've been forced into a corner. Like, we're gonna have dental care for people who are making less than $70,000 by the end of the year. Like, that wouldn't have happened if they had a majority government, frankly. Pharmacare as well. Like, these things are because people have to compromise and think about other people. And when you can just bypass all of that with this is how this works, notwithstanding clause, we have a serious problem to democracy and to the will of the people and to the needs of the people as well. And that's the problem that I think you're highlighting, right?
Yes. There's a few things as well. Like, Patrick Lagacé, who's a columnist at La Presse, who was like personally does not agree with Bill 21, but has accepted that, well, a majority of Quebecers are in favor of it, therefore, and the government that's championed it has been elected twice. And the second time they were elected, it was an even greater majority. So you're making this argument that it's legitimate because it's popular or because it reflects the will of the majority. And in polling, it has gotten between 55 and 65% approval among the electorate. But again, like there was a time where 65% of Americans thought that the civil rights movement was moving too fast. The majority is always scared of the minority or is often irrationally afraid of the minority. And I don't think that might in this case makes right. And in fact, like, you saw a couple years back when a popular Muslim teacher in Chelsea was fired, or had to quit or resign or take off her hijab. The polling that happened after that showed support for Bill 21 dropped from 65% to 55%. It could have been a variety of factors, but that story was all over the news, and it clearly affected people. So if just seeing these examples of how it affects real people affects public perception of it, then shouldn't you see that something is like fundamentally wrong with that law? And again, like, but again, we're sidestepping. To me, the question should be, is it right or is it wrong? And you have these competing rights. You have people who are saying, well, my right to live in a secular society is violated by the fact that someone in a position of authority, a school teacher, is wearing this hijab. But first of all,
does that violate your right?
Let's take it at face value. Okay. And let's pretend that it in some way encroaches on. In my case, I mean, it's like your right to not be offended, right? Your right to not see something that upsets you, but you believe that your rights are infringed upon. So your answer is to completely infringe upon the teacher's rights, right? Like, there are competing rights, and I just believe that your freedom to practice your religion and to be able to display it. I don't care. You're a qualified teacher. There's a code of conduct that you have to observe. It's a public school. You're not allowed to preach religion. You can wear a hijab. I think your kid can tell the difference. Our entire daycare system is more or less run by, you go to almost any daycare in Montreal, there are women in hijabs caring for our children, and our kids aren't coming out of there radicalized. They're coming out of there loved, and they're coming out of there.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I grew up
and these are the most important years developmentally for a child. So
Yeah.
your kid can see a hijab when you need a cheap daycare, but your kid can't see a hijab when it's time to learn mathematics. I don't understand how we can't just have difficult conversations with our children about what religion means, what the hijab means. And I mean, I know we always come back to this, but I find it terribly offensive to working, our fellow Quebecers who are a huge part of our society and who we want to integrate with us and who we want to share this land with. So it is extremely discouraging, but I am encouraged to see that the union joined the fight.
Me too. And I think I hope that they'll really bring the fight to the government because I just don't understand. I understand on like a superficial level why they're doing it, but on a like practical, actual level, it's just discriminatory.
Well, do you really want secularism or do you want to fight about secularism? Do you really want to build that big tunnel or do you want to have a fight about building that big tunnel? Do you really want to...
These are always the questions you have to ask.
Do they want the goal or do they just want to fight with Ottawa?
Are you cynical or are you just trying to be different? It's like, there's like sort of in the Quebec government, historically speaking and currently speaking, especially currently, there is a contrarian nature to it, which is contrarian because...
Well, I mean, in some cases, I think our values in Canada's don't align, and that's
for
fine
sure. But
it's genuine.
But 20 years ago, that was clear, and PQ was building towards maybe a nation.
Yeah.
Whereas now, the CAQ just seems contrarian.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I challenge you, Legault. You are looking at me right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Stop it.
He's a big fan.
Think about your actions, and think about who they affect, and remember that these are human beings that you are mistreating.
Children of God.
Legault. Just throwing it out.
We're all cogs, childrens of God. I just wanted to give a shout out to John Lurch, who is the owner of Here Designs. We'll include a link to his website in our episode description. He just made us some really cool posters for a campaign we're about to launch to raise more awareness about the rover. He donated his time, and he's the guy who, if you like the rover's logo, John Lurch designed it. He redesigned our logo for the Midnight Choir. Huge friend of the podcast, great friend of ours. We're super lucky for you, John, and we just wanted to say thanks a lot, man. Last thing, this is not a humble brag; it's a brag. A story that originated from the Rover and that was later translated into French and published in L'Actualité is nominated for a National Magazine Award.
Which one?
Fight or Flight. It's our story about boxing and mental health, and it was kind of like a personal essay about my demons. And I just wanted to say thanks to the team at L'Actualité for translating it, for applying for the award. And every time we're in the conversation for an award or something like that, it shouldn't be important, but it really helps me feel like we're legitimate and we're really, like we're accepted by our peers and like we belong in the conversation. And that wouldn't be possible without the subscribers. That wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you so much. If you like this project, check us out at therover.ca. And if you want to support us, check us out at therover.ca/support-us. therover.ca/support-us. I know usually that's your job, but I wanted to be.
What else could they do to support us?
They could subscribe to our YouTube page. They could give us a 5-star review on whatever podcasting streaming service you're consuming this on. They could send us an email to you or to me. Anything where you want to get involved. If you have a question, if you want to reach out to us, if you want to be on Team Rover, there's plenty of place. Not for you, Bob. You know what you did, Bob. You know what you did. Remember the corn muffins.
Bye. All right. Great work. That